the SOS team. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. And also, in advance, some of these things here might be a bit provocative. This is all thinking in progress, and it's part of figuring out how we fit many like dialogues, even controversies into a path for figuring out solutions for the interlocked crisis of climate change and sorry, and ocean health crisis as well. So a bit of an outline. I'll tell you a bit about Ocean Visions, and then like what is the problem that we are trying to address, and a little bit about our concept of why do we exist and why action from a scientific perspective is necessary in this moment. And I will go into just straight into the issues. No need to go deeper into that outline. So first of all, Ocean Visions is, I would say, a new type of NGO, or newish. It was founded around 2018, 2019. It emerged out of this uneasiness among several oceanographic institutions, especially in the US and Canada, that they were producing a lot. Like there was a very high level production at the ocean climate nexus, but there was little translation of that production into solutions. And so they were trying to figure out how do we enact this into ocean engineering, how do we enact this into more startups to address this very urgent problem of the ocean and climate crisis. So Ocean Visions emerges at the center of this network. As you can see, many of those institutions are very, very well known, but there is still very northern, very North American. There is one partner from the UK, the National Oceanography Center, and one from Italy. We are now also bringing Stellenbosch University from South Africa, and also a pretty large partner from South Korea. So there is an effort to expand this internationally. And the main role that we have here is, one, we try to guide the conversation into what is available today. So what is it that we know? What is it that we don't know and we need to figure out? What it will take to know those things. So that's why we work especially with roadmaps, and we work with philanthropic institutions to bring resources in those underfunded high potential areas that face massive either technical, like logistical, even legal hurdles. So trying to see how we can see if it's worth pursuing any of those options. And we also facilitate collaboration, and these collaborations go from the specific institutions, but also trying to expand it beyond, and that's why we are engaged with the UN Ocean Decade. So the Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solutions is our contribution. We used to have a center for ocean climate solutions that's not anymore operating, so most of our effort now is in that area is going into this program. Now, how is it that we work? The main concept for our strategy is that we need a comprehensive strategy for the ocean climate issue. So we look into what is the traditional climate agenda, and we take it a few notches up. So traditional climate action agenda is mitigation, adaptation. So especially in the mitigation area, it's where most of the efforts are concentrated. In our agenda, that is covered by what we call reduce. And our reduce agenda, it's all about new methods. So we're always looking for additionality. We're looking for things that are not yet very well established. And in that area right now, we're looking at seaweed bioeconomy, for example. And we're looking at ocean-based renewable energy as a way to power carbon removal. And then carbon removal, the remove agenda, that's one of the key pieces of our work. The reason for that is that we have a massive challenge regarding the amount of gigatons that are already placed on the agenda, but that very few governments are touching right now. So it is part of the, what we could say, responsibilities for decision makers, but it's not very well established as, like, we don't have the tools. We're relying, all scenarios under 2 degrees are relying on carbon removals, but there is no sense that we will get into the type of scale necessary. And then we have our repair agenda. And repair refers to marine ecosystems repairs. And that usually we use this concept of climate solutions, but that's less than a solution. It's kind of a temporary backstop. It's like a way to sustain certain ecosystems before they are completely gone. So as they provide some services, they provide some, like they stabilize the climate, say, even though that's more linear, but say the Arctic, it's like a massive service for the planet, like to cool the planet. However, we are seeing more and more like potential that it will have ice-free summers and even worse conditions, with all the implications that kind of knock-on effects from that. And then we have our REACH program, which is where we are focused on establishing dialogues about every single one of these options, because a lot of the science, especially the most kind of forward, like future-looking deep tech of these options, are mostly happening, all the research is happening in North America, or say in the UK with the ARIA program or a few other European agencies. But there is not kind of an international, well-established conversation, and we are trying to activate that conversation through partnerships. And one of those methods is the Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solutions. This is where we're looking into like science collaborations, we are looking into policy reviews, also participating in all governance fora to understand what we can do to facilitate science research field trials in all of these areas. Right now we have more than 30 projects endorsed. Under the last call, which closed in August, we received 15 new applications. And that is testament to the interest in this area. There is like more and more production publications coming into this, like from like proposals for some of this work, but at the same time also caution. And interestingly, we get both. So we are at GEOS, we are a place where we have these two areas coming together. And one good example is the University of Melbourne has now an initiative that is looking at the governance of climate interventions, ocean-based climate interventions. And that initiative is also one of the latest to apply under the GEOS program, and they were very present in the media, I would say, recently. But it's a very productive conversation in the end, I would say. So what's the problem that we are interested in here? The crisis in the ocean, like this where climate and ocean meets. We are concerned about thermal stress, chemical stress, acidification, deoxygenation, but also tipping points, which is not a perfect framing, but it's one way to look into these systems that are under high pressure and that they could just turn into completely irreversible paths. So that's relevant, and I use there between parentheses the Anthropocene ocean as a concept that maybe is like not so used anymore, but I think it is a very good way to say that we're living in this situation of mostly hour, but a very incomplete hour of our making. So the baselines, everything is shifting so much that we could not say that our influence or the influence of human actions is not what is defining lots of the characteristics of the ocean right now. So probably I don't need to tell you too much about the obvious in the sense, but like how the ocean is absorbing a very large part of the excess heat from the atmosphere or from like, all these emissions, but also how the changes in acidification are equivalent to the patterns of absorption of CO2 in the ocean. And that's where we move into like the where alarms are ringing very, very loudly, which is that is not just like a measure of okay, changes in pH or temperature. That translates into massive losses of biomass. That of course has implications for biodiversity, but not just biomass, but also quality of biomass. So content of phosphorus or other components in phytoplankton, that is all being degraded. And if we follow these patterns, we are going to be in a very scary situation. But the problem is, this is all thinking end of the century. The amplification of what happens by the losses of phytozooplankton are massive once we start looking into like larger mammals or fish, and also how differently this affects different parts of the planet, being near the tropics where most of the changes will happen in a negative sense, and where we have, of course, very large populations that are still depending on, like coastal, especially communities that are depending on those fisheries and those resources, and yeah, that way we're looking at a certain catastrophe, plus all the other impacts like a sea level rise and changes in weather patterns. And then on the tipping point side, and of course, we know this year has been very interesting for this, because there has been a lot of alarm caused, not necessarily for the right reasons, but we do know that there are changes in like circulation patterns in the ocean. So one of those is AMOC, that has been very present in media. But last week there were also some publications about the kind of, I would not say end, but the suspension or basically that there was no upwelling of the coast of Panama this year. And that is a major change. Like the cooling and the fertilization effect that the natural upwelling has, that just didn't happen in this season. And those are just bits that we are saying, and they're very scary, of course. Now, this is where things get more provocative. So climate scientists and have traditionally been this voice of alarm saying, okay, this is what's happening, like we are characterizing like the different systems in the planet. Very high quality data. We saw, especially if you have been paying attention to the US, how one administration comes in and they just start deleting data, start deleting repositories, ending entire programs, and all of a sudden we start losing a lot of like this configuration of what is happening right now. And at the same time, like we have the like climate science or even ocean scientists saying, this is happening, this is terrible, it's like we're facing a major catastrophe. But that still is not moving the needle in terms of the climate agenda, say in terms of emissions reduction. We are seeing some level of emissions reduction. We are seeing peak kind of emissions for some countries. However, this is like under all scenarios or more realistic scenarios, we are going into 3 degrees or even more. And that is just what we can see. It's not like, I'm not saying it because I have any control over it, which is, I will talk a little bit about it later, but it's just happening. And we can be very mad and angry that this is how things are going, but we have not been able to accelerate things at the rate necessary. And I use here this quote from the German ideology, which was pretty much representing what was happening in this 19th century moment of industrial revolution and changes in say, the formation of the civil society, which is, we had so many at the time, so many philosophers describing how the world was, but there was so little, like there was a lot of, like, okay, there are all these pieces that are not working in society. But like for a philosopher, you will be happy with just saying that. So now, from a science perspective, are we doing everything that we can in terms of what we could contribute for climate action? Is it enough to just say how like awful and sad the circumstances are, or is there something else that we could do? And I say that with like a lot of caution, because not all action is good action, but there is probably a space to do more. So Ocean Vision's perspective, and I think it's also my personal perspective at this point, is that we need to really explore a broader portfolio of action, of options. We need to invest in more science. We know that a lot of these systems and really large-scale infrastructures, like they do not depend necessarily in individuals or small groups of people. So we need to create what could be the alternatives to to what exists now. And I used this example, and probably you will hear a lot about this over the next few weeks. There was a publication in Frontiers in a journal from Frontiers where they basically said that we should halt research into specifically climate interventions in the Arctic. So there was like a group of scientists. Interestingly, and this is again like very very personal view, I think that was more of an opinion piece rather than necessarily a research piece. Because for a research piece, like you know that most research like articles will end with we need more research in this area. What they will say is we need to stop researching in this space. Like it's a waste of resources, it's a distraction, and a series of other points that were, in my perspective, much more ideological than necessarily scientific. So that is like a big debate right now. There will be a campaign soon where there are several organizations that are looking for support from scientists just to say we really need to continue researching this, and this type of statements are not very productive when we really don't have plan B. And just one point on the side is that there is a Finnish organization that really led the response to that article before anybody else was out there, and that is Operatio Artis. And they have been really kind of, they're very bold in the way that they have been like moving in this climate space. And I absolutely invite you to read their response to that article. It's like a youth group from Finland, but I think it's one of the most mature statements I have seen in this space. So going back to the issue of how are things going, like how are we doing in mitigation? It's just like we're not doing that great, and we are heading into very dangerous amounts of warming. Interestingly, that article that I just mentioned, they call for a mitigation only, and it's like a kind of a heroic thing, and that will be like meeting this curve, which is almost, I haven't heard many people who would defend that as a viable option today. So Operatio Artis called that like the real techno-optimism, like the idea that like just drop everything else, we will absolutely stick to this and we will do it. And we just don't have enough evidence that that's feasible. And I don't say that as like, oh, I'm so happy, like, I want to be right about this. It's more like everything we know that points to the fact that probably we just cannot do it now. We should do more, absolutely, but that's not happening. So that leads us to this problem of we are facing this already damaged world. Michel Calon used this concept of like acting in a certain world, like when we're moving and we just like don't have all certainties. Like There are all these objects in science and technology that have almost a life of their own that we cannot necessarily control, and we have a limited number of instruments, tools. In terms of biodiversity, conservation has been kind of key as a tool, and here, like, lots of injustices in the way I'm describing this, but there is this inspiration from deep ecology where we have this separation of kind of humans and nature, and there are still some echoes of that in the idea that nature will heal itself. And if we think seriously about it, probably yes, but not necessarily in the way that makes human life as we have understood it necessarily viable, or not viable in a comfortable way. Like, those things cannot be controlled so linearly. So there is also this tendency to think that that there is an ocean, kind of a pristine ocean that we can go back to. And so far we know that we can just restore certain conditions. We are not necessarily going to have the same type of like distribution of species that we had in 1700s, and like things are just not necessarily that the absolute goal is that we will go back to something so precise. And then always in this space there is this distinction between those who are in conservation and those who are in sustainable use. And sustainable use also has its limitations under the current debate. So all this idea that there are safe yields, that there is like a prosperity component, that we can like have conservation and fisheries and all this makes options. But the problem is we still know that the fish will probably not be there. We already know that like we could establish an MPA, but that will still be degraded. Like that will still be affected by acidification. Like thermal stress, like just because you say that there is an MPA, that's not going to be saved from those conditions. So back to, like, is there anything else that we can do? So we have been, and as I say, in a very imperfect way, thinking in terms of what the goal is, like what kind of stewardship or what kind of paradigm we can move into so that we can have make a dent into this problem. Because of course it's massive. Of course, like doing anything in the ocean, I mean, we already cause so much change indirectly, say through emissions. But now is an issue of do we have the capacity to challenge thermodynamics in a way that we will have an impact over this like very, very large ocean atmosphere combination. So yeah, we are looking into this agenda, trying to integrate restoration, trying to see how some tech options or some other options could be applied to adaptation, and also how to govern these potential climate interventions. So being the goal to safeguard, as I say, safeguard some of these ecosystems, safeguard functions, like understanding what is it that's necessary and investing in those options. And the other very distressful aspect of this is that we are faced with imperfect scenarios. It's not that we can compare against like a scenario that is like all beautiful and shiny and another one that is like completely ugly. It's risk against risk. So, and that's very difficult, and that requires, like, in order to have that type of comparison, we need a lot of scientific production. Because in order to understand what is the risk of, say, inaction and the risk of intervention, we need to have at least some baseline levels of certainty. And that is where a lot of our work is focused these days. Just recently we had a request for proposals that's based on specifically Arctic interventions. So we also fund a little bit of research. That's part of our work. And yeah. Also, tell me if there is anything that that you want to react to, because I think this is all very charged. So I'll just leave it very open. So there was a lot of this 2010s production around this, specifically in I would say environmental humanities, social sciences, and interestingly, I would say most of these authors would not be so inclined to what they will call geoengineering, but at the same time, I think they give the keys or like the elements of thinking on how some of this work on interventions could be done, say, better. So what could be like the guiding paradigm for it? And what is common to most of them is this idea of the damaged planet, of this kind of ethics of survival. So it's not like we are in an almighty, powerful position to just anticipate the future in this kind of progress-minded way. It's like we can only do like just as much to ensure that certain conditions are preserved, and I think that like the staying with the trouble from Haraway and all of this thing that is like, oh, this sticky situation, how are we going to get out of this this problem, and there are just like no easy solutions, no easy ways out, and I think that is what should inspire this this quest. So in terms of what Ocean Visions is doing, I mentioned remove and repair. For the first one, the issue of the negative emissions agenda, like how short we are in the negative emissions agenda, how big the challenge is and how little we have, and how much we are depending on that for, they say, the 2 degrees agenda. And then on the polar side, and specifically on the Arctic side, just how warming is eroding those marine like ecosystems, like eroding ice, and how that will have so many trickle-down effects, as I said, from sea level rise, from the loss of albedo, and also the cooling aspect. So first on the carbon dioxide removal, and this is mostly taken from IPCC modeling, we have a massive amount of especially legacy emissions that need to be removed from circulation, removed from the atmosphere, if we are going to achieve less than 2 degrees of warming. And that's virtually all scenarios, except for like the one more extreme scenario that I mentioned earlier, but that's not a realistic scenario anymore. Very few countries have a strategy for that. There are ways in which like there are agreements under Article 6, say 6.2, to buy conservation projects or that type of more traditional carbon removal, but in terms of novel carbon removal, which is where like the gigaton capacity is, we just don't have yet anything there. And most reports are like the calculation is that between 5 and 15 gigatons need to be removed. Like that's kind of the scale of this issue. But those have to be removed yearly by 2050, and then for the rest of the century. And that is massive, massive in terms of the amounts of energy that such an endeavor will require, and also in terms of the types of materials that need to be moved, either to like do the removal or then to store like that carbon. So it's like an inverse industrialization. It's like a fossil fuels industry, but to the other side. And it's just, in terms of volumes, it's just a very crazy undertaking. And so in terms of why focusing on the ocean, it's again a matter of size. It's a matter of existing processes. We don't have, for the most part, enough land-based options to achieve that type of gigaton scale. But there are certain ways that this could be done through ocean methods. So that's where a lot of our kind of resources and focus has been, especially at the early iterations of Ocean Visions. The focus was very much on MCDR. So this is some of our very early products, but still relevant, where we were looking at the different families of options to do marine carbon dioxide removal. And very important to note that these are not, we're not talking here about deployment. These are all options for research into different techniques. And we have produced several of these from some of the, you may have heard about some of these methods, but for example, ocean alkalinity enhancement, which is a chemical method where you use either direct application of alkaline material into the water to create a reaction that locks carbonates and bicarbonates in the water, and that could lead through the exchange water exchange to like a reduction in carbon. It's not direct capture from the air, and this is important. It's not from the atmosphere, it's in the water, but it's through this other exchange that the idea is that you will have an impact over those legacy emissions. And you can also use some electrochemical methods through membranes or what some people call direct ocean capture. So they're all kind of in similar families. But there are, I would say that ocean alkalinity enhancement is probably the most advanced. If you have, maybe not, have followed this story, Canada just announced, a company in Canada announced a contract for $30 million, probably one of the largest so far. If we don't take into consideration the aquatic contracts in Malaysia and Singapore. So there are efforts that are going now into the commercial side, and that's happening. And there are lots of, again, lots is maybe too many, but there are also publications into environmental, kind of ecological impacts. And as Ocean Visions, we are working not just for ocean alkalinity enhancement, but for other methods as well. We had a call for proposals, and now there is a group that is working on an environmental impact assessment framework that could be applied for most of these methods. So with a good understanding of what they are doing and what needs to be looked into for those assessments. So similar family, electrochemical. That's, you can find all these illustrations on our website. It's part of our roadmaps. And also biological methods. This one was a lot on the media for a while, because it's very, it looks really good. It's or maybe for some people, I don't know, unless you are a kelp ecologist, but just massive production of macroalgae. So at maybe 2 years ago, there was this issue with running tide. So running tide, which was originally researching, they had this research site in Iceland and labs. They were originally researching algae, so different types of seaweed and how they could be used. At the time, they thought about sinking it. But that company went out of business, not by sinking seaweed. They were sinking actually wood chips. That was a different. They were trying testing deep ocean storage, but that's one example of one startup that was working and trying to find an appropriate method, but it didn't work for them. And of course, there is not just the idea of intentional sinking of biomass to the bottom of the ocean. There's other forms of sequestration. There was another startup that also doesn't, but that was more kind of microalgae. But they were burying biomass in the desert in Morocco. That's another way of thinking about this problem. And then you have the on the decarbonization side, how this could also be used for biofuels or for plastics and that type of research. So, and microalgae is another one, and that's probably the one that has been the most controversial because there has been like previous cases of someone taking action in like on their own without any proper governance structure in place, and this was the infamous case of Haida in Canada 12 years ago, and which led to a great extent to the only piece of regulation that right now really exists in this area, which is under London Protocol, the amendment of 2013 on marine geoengineering. Finland is one of the only ones that have ratified that amendment, and that restricts ocean iron fertilization, which is one method of algae, like microalgae cultivation. However, they have been trying to expand that. There is a framework for under that amendment for research, but it's a very restrictive research framework, and that's one area where we have been advocating for like more research enabling frameworks, understanding that the problem at the time was like that there were no really nothing in place to govern those efforts. So it was, if you look at the media from the time, it's really kind of a curious framing. I think if that would have happened closer to today, probably the reaction would have been different. I don't have a positive view on it, but I'm just I say that there are so many things that we could have understood out of these types of if it was treated as research up until now, that probably would have been worth continuing with the research instead of like freezing it out of this scary moment of that time. Sorry. And then another one, which is what usually falls under, we don't use too much like the nature-based solutions framework, because a lot of restoration for what is denominated blue carbon requires a lot of intervention as well. So there is a lot of technology needed, and there is a lot of disruption, but that's definitely like an important piece in this puzzle as we scale with what we have, and then we move into what could work in the future. And similarly, we have been working on this Arctic families of options, going from what are the effects of protection, conservation in a more traditional sense, to pollution management, methane mitigation, black carbon, also carbon dioxide removal as an potentially effective option. But then moving into these other pieces, which is where that article that I mentioned was more critical, which is restoration of ice or ice management. So what could be done in those areas? There are some field trials, especially in Canada. That's where the two initiatives I know, which is Arctic Reflections and Real Ice. They have been working on ice thickening, especially, and a lot of these techniques come from things that you will see, say, in a ski resort. Like some of those things, you take them from there, and then you kind of start scaling the concept. We don't know if any of these are like working, but we are like our understanding is that we need to know, especially if you can find a pathway to power, like the energy is a major issue, and with and this is where risk comes into play, because there is a disruption taking, say, pumps or drones to certain parts of the Arctic. So the point is it worth it? Under what conditions? Under like what types of kind of how desperate we will have to be to do something like that. And if we are that desperate, do we have the enough like capacity to understand what this like what it will take and what it will mean, especially for like multiple species that we find up in the Arctic. And this one that there is even a civil society initiative for a non-use agreement, in particular for aerosol injection in the atmosphere. But that's not the only form of solar radiation modification. And I think that is an important consideration. So there are a few other things that are under testing. So cirrus cloud thinning, for example, to like change the, it's not storage, but just to release heat from certain parts of the Arctic so that there is more ice formation during certain periods of time. Again, this is all very early research and development stages. Maybe we know or understand a bit more what would happen with aerosol injection, like sulfur injection, but still those are not options that necessarily like it will make you so I don't know that you will feel that, oh yeah, we have an option. Like those are all so imperfect, and they're all like they all come with different risk profiles. They all come with different governance challenges. Hopefully none of these things have to be used, but it is this sense of emergency, this sense of we are not moving fast enough that leads to like this type of explorations. And it's not that risk or all those circumstances are just going to go away if we don't. So that I think is an important consideration. And of course, surface albedo modification, and there are several options there. And here, probably you are already familiar with the advisory piece from the International Court of Justice that introduces a bit that I think is pretty like changes the status quo, at least from a legal perspective. We had first the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea ruling advisory, where they established that CO2 is a pollutant and that states have an obligation to like mitigate that pollutant. However, they also incorporated this line that you cannot use one pollutant to clean another pollutant, which is almost, yeah, it could be read as one way of saying like careful with carbon dioxide removal, because in a lot of its forms, carbon dioxide removal implies the use of another product. So that was International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. However, the consideration of CO2 as a pollutant is and as an obligation is highly relevant, especially when we look at what the ICCJ said also like a few weeks ago regarding the obligation of states to restore the climate system. So it's like to protect and restore, and creates this kind of legal status for the climate system. And this is like a strange move where we are going from like we have a sense of a legal form, say for water, or a legal form for some species. But now we are moving the goalposts into the planetary level. So we are working with a notion of the planet, in this case of the climate system, as a legal entity. And I think that's a pretty massive innovation. And then at the same time, and I think one of the reasons this is coming into the debate, we have treaties like UNFCCC or like the Convention on Biological Diversity, the London Protocol. Soon, what will come into play with BBNJ, biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. They're still operating in a certain way as silos. One of the reasons is that they have different mandates. UNFCCC is pretty much a development-oriented agreement, while CBD is a conservation one. And one way of seeing the difference is when you compare the concept of precautionary principle that you find in climate, UNFCCC, and the concept of precautionary principle that you find in CVD. So on the one way, it refers to lack of scientific certainty should not stop action to protect the climate system. I'm using the language that is not exactly the one of on the UNFCCC or Paris Agreement, but kind of analogous. And the other one is that refers to the same, but in order to prevent action that could affect biodiversity. So they are not necessarily symmetrical. And I think that that is a very important consideration. And their mandates are not for the same. Until recently, London Protocol would say, or London Convention Protocol, that their mandate is to ensure marine protection. Their mandate is not to facilitate climate action. But what happens when all of these things are compounded, and it's not just biodiversity or climate, like they are absolutely related. So that fragmentation, and this could be not necessarily completely fair, but we think that that level of fragmentation, that differences in mandates, have affected research, have affected the capacity to figure out ways to have more effective tools, because each one of these treaties will kind of come with different challenges. And even there are some assumptions that institutions start taking us through. So one of those is in CVD, some civil society groups came up with this concept of the de facto moratorium on geoengineering. And they apply it to everything as a blanket. So there is no such a thing as a de facto moratorium on geoengineering on CVD. CVD is very cautious, and they defer authority to say, we need to understand these things before they are ever, they ask governments, don't take action in these areas unless you have a good understanding and good scientific base. And even more recently, in 2016, they said, and actually we need to do research to understand all these techniques. So it's not that they're saying this should be all halted, which is the interpretation that some groups have put forward. It's more about, we really need more science, so we know what works, what doesn't work, and actually they use that language of what could actually be positive. So what we have been advocating for is the alignment of mandates. So both CVD and UNFCCC had this year this call for enhancement of policy coherence. So they have been doing consultations. I have participated in particular in the CVD one. I went to the meeting in Bonn for it. And interestingly, the groups are so different. Like the groups that will go to CVD, like on the biodiversity side, and the groups that would go to climate meetings, they are still talking in the code of their object of interest. And I think even if we have a call on each of those to have an integration, as long as the mandate and the object is different, there is no necessarily a lot of space for integration. So that is where things are right now. There are some Bern system, like the Bern process, that brings together the Rio Conventions to try to find alignment. But those are still small, not so strong processes. But we think, and this is like an Ocean Visions thing, that we really need to find some kind of coordination mechanism so that we have established priorities to really make a dent into the problem. Some recent work along these lines. This is something that we work with the Saving Center. I mean, they did, but we have been in dialogue with them, where they look into all, specifically London Protocol. They have a previous review of all other governance instruments, but basically they're proposing, based on ICJ advisory, based on International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea and other like recent pieces of legal advice, one path towards integration, one path toward facilitating, creating enabling conditions for research, in particular for marine carbon dioxide removal. And similarly, at the past UN Ocean Conference, the Ocean Panel, the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, they also had their own set of proposals. And an interesting one, at least for me, is that they call on governments to have a very flexible approach to MCDR, in the sense of like reviewing all their like legislation or regulation, but also creating pre-permitted test beds. So they are explicitly saying there is very little involvement of governments right now. There is a lot of complaint about like the private sector taking too much space in this area, but we could argue that the reason that there is so much presence of startups is because governments have not taken a very solid step to regulate, or a very solid the kind of taking a role where they are leading in the space, and that's not happening. So that comes from the high-level panel. They are asking governments to do that, and they're also asking them to go into this kind of experimentation mode of setting up test beds to understand what could work. So again, as I said, sometimes taking it a few notches in a direction that might not be so familiar, but Michelsa had this the beginning of the 90s, post kind of fall of the wall, and during that, where the conversation was dominated mostly by nuclear as the technology that at the time was kind of complicating things. So was thinking in terms of how do we create kind of fit for purpose kind of systems. So how is it that we go into, and I think he was anticipating things like what's happening right now with ICJ, by saying we are shaping these scientific objects, now we understand as natural objects, like the climate system. We're giving reality to it in a legal sense, and that gives us opportunity to reformulate action. And I think that is creating kind of a set of obligations now between this non-human entity, super abstract, and kind of gives the opportunity to operate with this kind of different ethics of responsibility, to again take another sociological concept there, and how translating that ethic into policy coherence, kind of creating some binding obligations could lead to this idea of okay, we have kind of a common goal here, and not like in what way we can understand this as like not a fight between those who want to prioritize biodiversity and those who want to prioritize climate, but just seeing it as it's kind of an existential issue that is a combination of all of the above, and we cannot make clean distinctions. And that, I think, is at the basis of this. So, of course, it's not just a scientific issue. It's political, it's legal, ethical. So that is, I think this group is super diverse, and some of I heard you having some of these conversations in between, like across the lines, and I think that is relevant for this debate, certainly. And yeah, and as I said, like bending a bit the concept is like looking at all this new options or new possibilities that are given by the international legal system as a way to kind of create the next generation of treaties, the next generation of regulations, and understanding that it's a much more complex world, but at the same time enables other actions that were not possible until now. Word of caution, there are challenges to this, of course. The one that is used a lot is the idea of a moral hazard. The way I look at that problem of saying that there will be mitigation deterrence by exploring more options is that we just have a mathematical problem here, that we're just it's not possible to kind of remove like carbon as your way to get out of the problem. It's not a get out of jail solution. It's not like a card that will let you say, okay, yeah, now we continue business as usual. It's just not possible because it's too expensive, it's too disruptive. And of course the potential, and this, if you think at the criticisms in the past of nuclear energy, say Wiener and his ideas of like why like nuclear power is sustained by networks that are like authoritarian almost in nature, there is of course with such large technologies the risk of either corporate geopolitical captures or actors taking unilateral action, and that's one of the reasons to kind of get ahead of it, creating more governance structures. Also unequal capacity, the problem of who can really participate in this research endeavors, and that's why this needs to be much more than a scientific problem and needs to be turned into like a governance and a legal issue as well, so that there is not uneven participation and there are like mechanisms already in place before there is any kind of deployment. Also the waiting game, so governments that are smaller saying it's not our problem, like we are not that like we're not like putting so many emissions out, that type of argument. But at the end of the day, even if from like a climate justice perspective you have not contributed in the same way to the problem, you are going to be affected, and in some cases even more like affected in a worse way than those who are the historical high emitters. So that creates some types of interesting dynamics in whose interest it's important to advance this agenda. And of course, the accelerationist temptation of saying, well, this is a good opportunity to see capitalism fall. So if all the contradictions are accelerated and the system falls because of like the climate crisis, we may move into like a different world. My perspective on that is that will be such a big humanitarian crisis that's not like something I will advocate for. Super interested in transitions and different ways of living together, but I don't think that creating a crash is the best way. So yes, just to finish here, and probably already used more time than I. Okay. So this idea of ethics of responsibility, like how is it possible to have any amount of hope right now? I think it's a distinction of hope for what. As I say, it's not for paradise lost. It's not like that we will go into a clean, like a reset of the Holocene. But there is, in terms of responsibility, this concept of we should explore options. We should explore what could kind of add, what could really be a good way of complementing the agenda that we have that is not working fast enough, and that we should put all our efforts to make it work. But in the meantime, we also need to have alternatives. And the prudence in this case, creating like more repositories of data, creating like the data infrastructure that would allow us to make better decisions. Even if they are not perfect decisions, in order to compare scenarios, we will need a lot more scientific production. And yeah, and the idea is like we have to ground it in action. It's not that the scientific perspective will be to wait, again, the waiting game, to think that if we are super loud or we are super sad, someone is going to like go and do the right thing. It's not happening right now. We're doing a lot of that, but probably we need to also expand the repertoire of contestation and the repertoire of technical options if there is any hope to be built. And again, like this advice on how we can use these innovations that are coming from international law to take them into the reality of our regulation. So I think they are not just for headlines, which is right now when we talk about, oh, the climate system has been recognized. It's like, oh, yeah, rivers have rights under certain legislations. I think that can be used and that can be incorporated in the way that we are practicing science or policy or or governing these spaces. And that will be all. Thank you so much.